So in this talk, we're going to be continuing, as I mentioned in the last talk, these 10 terms. So the first term that we looked at last time was problem solving, and we'll look at the other 9 in this talk. So I mentioned last time that we were going to do these 10 terms, and you can see on this kind of bubble diagram how we had the intro a while back, and now we have these 10 terms that we're looking at this time. And then we'll be looking at all of these different talks for the next few weeks. And this is kind of the first half of the class. So we'll have 10 terms that we'll look at for the first half of the class, and then we'll have a test, and then we'll actually have 10 new terms that we'll look at for the second half of the class. But very fundamental that we understand these first 10 terms for these first few weeks. These are the 10 terms. Last time we dealt with problem solving, that one right there at the top. And just to recap that a little bit, we were talking about problems being things that involve doubt and uncertainty and difficulty. And that solving them might not be like nailing a solution, but it's really more about answering or explaining. And we talked about 5 characteristics of the problems we were going to be talking about this semester. The first is that they may be self-defined, like Jane Goodall or James Turrell, or they might be given, coming from an external source, as was the case with Eleanor Roosevelt. And we talked about the problems might have many solutions, like Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin addressing polio vaccine with completely different solutions. So a single problem may have many solutions. We talked about the fact that they might be huge problems, they might be tiny problems. So, it's all sorts of problems are involved here. We talked about the fact that the solutions may be measurable by quantitative measures, or in fact, they may not lend themselves to quantitative measures. And that's fine. That's perfectly acceptable in creative problem solving. And how could you tell whether Eleanor Roosevelt was a successful first lady or not? I mean, how do we quantify that? But it doesn't diminish in the least her contribution as a creative problem solver. And then we also talked about the fact that most of these problems are open-ended. And fundamentally, a big question that comes up in creative problem solving is, how do you know when you have enough of a solution to become productive? So it's not that you know at a certain moment, I'm done. It's always open-ended. Okay, so that was our definition of problem solving. Let's now look at those other 9 terms that I mentioned. And the first is one of my favorite words having to do with this class, and that is indeterminacy. And I've used it, thrown that out a bit in some of the other talks. But I think fundamental to understanding creative problem solving is figuring out how to deal with indeterminacy. How do you deal with problems that are a little vague, a little fuzzy? So the dictionary definition of indeterminacy is when something is not fixed. It's indefinite, or it's uncertain. It's not established. Things that are not settled. In math, it is, like we talked about before, a determinate equation is like 2x equals 10. There's one answer for that. We know, 5, nailed it. But an indeterminate equation is like 2x plus 3y plus z equals 35. Any number of solutions can be derived from different values of x, y, and z. It's indeterminate. And in physics, likewise, or other aspects of engineering, there are some equations that we call indeterminate equations because they can't be resolved. And something like tensegrity structure in physics we know that is a structure that's mostly in tension, and it stands up. We know it stands up. It's a stable structure, but we can't find a mathematical model that explains that. So we call that an indeterminate situation. So all of this is about this kind of not settled, not established, vague, uncertain kinds of problems. Now, one of the things I want you to do in this whole talk is when we discuss one of these terms, I want you to think, am I good at that? Am I comfortable with that? Is that in my wheelhouse? Or is this something I'm a little uncomfortable with, or I'm a little uncertain about? And I'll be asking you in the check-in to help me understand which of these things feel good for you or not. And it's not that anyone, honestly, would feel comfortable or would be good at all of these 10 terms, but it's very important to understand where your strengths, where do you start from here. So, with the question of indeterminacy, is this something you feel comfortable with? I'm perfectly fine when things are vague. I'm perfectly fine when things are indefinite. Or, oh my God, I hate vagueness. I want things nailed, solid, clear. Indeterminacy is an inevitable part of creative problem solving. But it may be something that's a strength of yours that you bring to the table from the beginning. It may be something you want to work on becoming comfortable with that. So the second term here is indeterminacy. The third term I want us to talk about here is design. Now, design is, in architecture, design is a key word. It's how you solve problems is through design. And in many creative problem-solving cases, design is the way you solve the problem. And it has something to do with the technique or the approach that you take. The dictionary definition is design is to plan the form or structure of something. It's to form or conceive in the mind, to contrive. So it isn't that you get to a solution all at once. You contrive something, you imagine something, you conjure something. And then maybe you get a form or a structure or a plan to approach that. An outline sketch. Something that is at the first, it's kind of not complete, not wholly formed, but there is a direction there. And that's a part of the design process. It is stating intention or purpose or knowing where you're going. So to solve these problems, we design, we plan, we outline, we sketch, we contrive, we formulate an approach. That's designing a solution to the problem. And design is going to be a very key term this semester. The fourth of these terms is invention. And invention, if we go back to the root word invent, it is to originate as the product of one's contrivance or to produce or create with imagination. So this means that invention, this isn't like the problem is telling you this. This is coming from your own contrivance. It's something you're bringing to the problem. It's your own imagination that is important in that kind of invention. And the term invention really means the conception of an idea and the means or apparatus to bring it to a result. So we're then taking that contrivance in our head and we're bringing it to some kind of fruition, and that's creating an invention. So important to understand that inventing comes out of the inventor, not wholly out of the problem. So this is something you're bringing to the table. Again, are you comfortable with invention? Are you comfortable with using your imagination? Is that a strength you bring to this, or is imagination kind of tough for you? So something to think about. The next term I want to talk about is the term creativity itself. The notion to create is to cause something unique to come into being that would not naturally evolve or is not made by an ordinary process. Creating involves the evolution of one's own thoughts and, again, imagination. It is to cause to happen or bring about or arrange by intention or design. So, again, design becomes a part inherently of creation. Creativity is resulting from the originality of thought or expression, or originative or productive. So again, over and over, these definitions are emphasizing something that is new, that's fresh, that is invented, that's original, that's unique. That's what we're looking at in creativity. Now, there are a couple of characteristics of creativity we need to keep in mind. One is that creativity is different than intelligence. Now, I'm a huge fan of intelligence. Believe me, I'm not diminishing intelligence a bit. And honestly, pretty much everybody in this class is intelligent. You wouldn't have gotten as far as you have. You wouldn't be here at UT if you didn't have a pretty high level of intelligence. But creativity is something in addition to intelligence. Now, intelligence is incredibly helpful in being creative. And there are parts of creativity that tap your intelligence significantly. But it is not the same as intelligence. Also, creativity is generative. It must produce something, so that you actually have to come up with something in the act of creativity. You can't just repeat something that's been told you before. It's not about regurgitation. It is generative. It makes something new, something fresh. Another characteristic of creativity is that it involves taking risks. There are going to be some false starts. There are going to be some failures. Are you comfortable with failure? Are you comfortable with taking risk? Because it's inherent in creativity. There's not a predictable and certain outcome. If you go through step A, B, C, D, it's not inevitable that you'll reach E. You may in fact fail. And then you have to kind of recoup and start all over again. So it's important to understand in creativity that it's not just being smart, and it's not just repeating something somebody has told you. It has to take a risk, create something new, and have the possibility of failure. So that is that term, creativity. The next term, the sixth term, is independent thinking. Again, really key for creative problem solving. The dictionary definition of independent is not influenced or controlled by the thoughts or actions of others. Again, wow, dude, think about that. Are you really comfortable saying, I will not be influenced or controlled by the thoughts or actions of others? Wow, that's a pretty strong thing. Probably you've had peer groups that you've been a part of where your actions were and your thoughts were controlled to some extent by others. Probably you were part of a family where maybe your actions and your thoughts might have been controlled to some extent by your parents. Isn't that the way it's supposed to be? Aren't you supposed to be influenced by and controlled by others? Well, part of creative problem solving is independent thinking, is being able to not be controlled by others. Second definition, autonomous or free. Can you really operate on your own, free of other people and their ideas and their judgments that they might exert on what you're doing? The third definition is self-confident or unrestrained. It takes a certain amount of chutzpah, confidence in yourself, to step out there and maybe get criticism or get disapproval from people who you love or you respect. But that's a part of being independent and a part of independent thinking. So on the left there is a guy named Bill Stumpf. We're going to look at him briefly later in the class. This is a guy who's a furniture designer, very, very accomplished furniture designer. He designed the Aeron chair, which you've seen 1,000 times. It's the most popular office chair, the highest selling office chair ever. And it was a completely reinventing of what an office chair was. So initially, he designs this thing and they do market studies. They have focus groups and they have people sit in it. They have people Tell them what they think about it. Is it beautiful? What do you like? What do you not like? And it got incredibly negative reviews. If he was controlled by the thoughts and actions of others, he'd have junked it and said, forget it. I made a mistake. We're not going there. But in fact, he had the self-confidence to say, no, this is a good chair. It is ergonomically absolutely superior to other kinds of chairs. It is practical. It is durable. It does all the things it ought to do. And he had a backer, Herman Miller, who put it on the market. And it took a while, but as people got used to it, they loved it. And it became an incredibly successful and popular chair. But he is an independent thinker, and that would have been absolutely key to his success. Another person we'll be looking at is Albert Einstein, maybe the ultimate independent thinker. This guy was independent thinking in every regard. He was politically very out there, kind of all by himself. He grew up in Germany. He totally disagreed with the German political system. Of course, that was when Hitler was on the rise, and he was Jewish, so you can understand a complete rejection of that. So he renounces his German citizenship and leaves and goes to Switzerland. Well, turns out he didn't really like the Swiss either. Didn't like the way they were running things. He rejects them and he leaves Switzerland. He goes to Italy. Well, didn't actually like the way they did things in Italy either. He comes to the United States, and he continued his entire career. He's extremely critical of the United States, and yet he continued to live here. But he was an independent thinker politically and culturally. He also, just on a personal level, was extremely independent thinking. He freaking got his girlfriend pregnant when he was a grad student. They decided to have the baby but not get married. Oh my God, he's in this very, very conservative Jewish family. This is totally the wrong thing to do. If he were controlled or influenced by the thoughts of others, he would not have gotten himself in that pickle, because his mom especially was just blown apart. Okay, they have the baby, they don't get married. Later on, they do get married. After that, they get divorced. And then he freaking marries his cousin. Who marries their cousin? It's just not the right thing to do. But he's an independent thinker. I mean, just take a look at the guy. Look at that haircut. Totally independent haircut. The way he looked, the way he dressed, completely independent. He lived in the United States most of his adult life. He never learned to drive a car. He just didn't want to drive a car. He's a Nobel Prize winning physicist, and he goes around on a bicycle all the time. This is independent thinking, and this can be a very powerful, powerful tool in creative problem solving. Okay, the next term is vision. And again, visionaries, vision, this is a great asset for creative problem solving. So a vision is the act or power of anticipating that which may come to be. It's a vivid imagination or conception or anticipation. A visionary is someone who is given to or characterized by the fanciful or not presently workable or unpractical ideas or views or schemes. Somebody who's idealistic, speculative, interested in things that are unrealizable. This is a person who's given to audacious, highly speculative or impractical ideas. A dreamer. Now, that's someone with vision. Vision is the ability to see things that are not there, to dream, to have ideas that are not practical, are not realizable, but maybe in the future they are, to be able to see the future and imagine the future, and that it would be very different from the present. And that then that vision would have a place and would have a practicality at that point, sometime in the future. Okay, so that term is vision. We need to think in terms of vision that it applies not just at the level of earth-shattering kinds of discoveries, but also at a mundane level. You can be a visionary about rather small but interesting problems. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering. Also, there's a question here of how do you resist practicality? We're all kind of trained to be practical. And it's hard to resist that notion of, I can't think that because that's not practical. How can you make sure that you're not relying always on the tried and true, that you're able to be a dreamer? And this is a notion of actually having harebrained ideas and trying to provoke them and use them as an asset. Okay, so the last three of these are really, really critical ones, I think. One of the things is that when you hit an indeterminate problem, one way to solve it is to bring values to that problem. So if 2x plus 3y plus z equals 35, and you plug in some values for x and y, you begin to get a solution for z. Often bringing values to a problem helps you find a creative solution. But then you have to know what your values are and what it is you're bringing to the problem. So values are ethical standards that are used as a basis for judgment. It's not a fact. If there's only one way of seeing this and it's a fact, then that's not a value-laden thing. It's something that you're using judgment. It's trust in the truth or existence of ideals, not immediately susceptible to proof. If you can prove it, it's a fact, it's not a value. So this is talking about things that are not provable. And it is indeterminate design problems that are often best solved by plugging in these values, as I was mentioning before. Now, a person we're going to be looking at in that regard is this guy, Joel Salatin. Joel Salatin is a farmer in Virginia. So if you move that camera over, should I stay here for the rest of the time? Yeah, I was not getting anything over there because I wasn't going back over there. I'm going to have to get better at this, but I think let's finish this one out here. So is the sound okay? It's not good. Now is the sound okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So one of the people we'll be talking about as regards values is Joel Salatin. So Joel Salatin is a farmer in Virginia, and he's an organic farmer. And you maybe you don't think of farming as a creative thing at all, but these days you can be a very creative farmer. There certainly are formulaic ways to farm these days. But Joel Salatin brought some values to this. Values about ecology, values about the land, values about sustainability, values about organic growing, about health, values about animals and treatment of animals. And he made his own way of farming based on those values. And he's got a very, very creative farm that's super sustainable. And economically extremely viable, but very different from the way other people farm. But that creativity came from the values that he brought to that problem. Now, these last two terms are ones that, and in particular, I want you to think about, how do I feel about this term? These are two that often when I ask the question, what are you comfortable with, what are you not comfortable with? These last two are high on the list of both some people feeling comfortable and other people feeling very uncomfortable. One is confidence. Confidence is defined as self-reliance, assurance, boldness, presumption, maybe even impudence, or certitude. Just feeling like this is right, I believe in this. And it not about facts, but about things that maybe can't be factually proven. Now, the reason why this is so critical in creative problem solving is because we're not dealing with facts completely. We're not dealing with one certain solution. So how do you have the confidence when somebody else may be criticizing that? They may say that doesn't seem right to me. How do you maintain the confidence to stick to your convictions? And it's kind of inevitable and essential in actually taking the risk, putting your neck out there, going for something that's new or different or fresh or unique. It takes a level of confidence. So confidence is a key term we're going to be looking at all through the semester. And this guy up here is Robert Moses, who's someone we'll be looking at later. This was a guy who's super smart guy, super intelligent guy. You know, graduates from Yale, undergraduate, goes to Oxford for graduate school, comes back to New York, and he's ready to set the world on fire. And his area is politics, and he wants to make a real contribution. So he writes those white papers and has all the right solutions, outlines them perfectly, and they don't get adopted. They get shot down. And he's a little bit of a meek guy, and he's just not being successful. He's smart, he's got great ideas, but they are not getting implemented. And then at a certain point he realizes, I need more confidence. I need to be able to really assert myself, convince people, and he musters that kind of confidence. And that makes the difference. Then his ideas turn into action, and they really make a difference. He was the guy who brought the United Nations to New York City. He's the guy who brought the 1964 World's Fair to New York City. He built an incredible amount of infrastructure in New York City and New York State. He had an enormous impact. But at a certain point, he had to go from being intelligent and having some good ideas that didn't get implemented to having the confidence to actually assert those ideas and convince people to do it. The 10th and final term I want us to talk about for the first half of the semester is rebellion. And again, this is sometimes taken as a pejorative word, that being rebellious is being bad. It is resistance to or defiance of authority or control or tradition. That's what the dictionary says. It turns out, honestly, Americans may have been so successful through the years at design and creativity because we've been a culture of rebels. We've been a culture of resistance. All the way from the very beginning, people like Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, they started a revolution. They were rebels. Now we think of them as, old white guys that are on money. But in fact, they were young Turks who were extremely rebellious. And if that war for independence had gone a different way, which at many points it looked like it was going to, they'd had their heads chopped off. This was a high-risk situation. They were very, very rebellious. And in some ways, you have to be rebellious in order to be creative and to solve problems in a creative way. Rebellion is almost essential. If you think everything's fine the way it is, why would you do anything different or anything creative? It's important that you actually want to change things, and that takes a little bit of rebellion. So these are the 10 terms: problem solving, indeterminacy, design, invention, creativity. Essential to have independent thinking, to be able to envision things in the future, to incorporate values that you bring to the table, and to have the confidence and the rebelliousness to really bring those things to fruition. So we'll be looking at these terms all the way through, especially the first half of the semester. But in our check-in for class next time, I want you to be thinking, what are things here that I'm comfortable with, that I feel like are natural to me, and what are things that I don't feel so comfortable with. What are tools that are easy to put in your toolbox? What are tools that might take some work or maybe never will be a part of your particular way of doing creative problem solving? Okay, see you next time.